Welcome to our historic landmark congregation. Parky Synagogue has been the scene of joy and grief. Happy occasions, that's life. Today, what brings all of us together is a partnership with the Consul General of France. France is now occupying the presidency of the European Union. Have you ever seen all these flags here? No. We always have the American, we have the Israeli, we have, whenever we have an important guest, whether it's the Prime Minister of Singapore or the Chancellor of Austria, we always show our solidarity with the people. What brings us together today is really a plague that has afflicted not only Europe, not only the United States, right here in New York City. And what's so encouraging for a Holocaust survivor to see a common strategy, a partnership in fighting this ancient hatred. That's why we're gathered here. Together we will prevail. United we will prevail. Divided we fail. And so, as a Holocaust survivor, Vienna born, having had to flee my hometown in 1938, doors were closed. There was no Israel at the time. Hungary, liberated in 1945, January 18th. Budapest by the Red Army, other concentration camps by the Allies, the United States, England and France. And I would have never thought after the war that I would have to speak against hatred, against anti-Semitism. I thought we learned a lesson, never again. So it's very painful, the realization that this ugly plague has afflicted mankind. And I say mankind because whatever happens when you have instability, society instability, convenient scapegoat, the Jew and the minority. So here we are today, united. You will hear from our distinguished panelists in finding ways to stem this tide that has afflicted mankind. I just want to make one observation and then call upon my neighbor and partner, Consul General of France. You know, every year, January 27, the diplomatic corps joined by the Secretary General, going back to Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, who, by the way, celebrated his birthday on the 13th. I don't forget old friends. Secretary General Guterres, every year, remembering the Holocaust. And today, I want to repeat what he said, the Secretary General Guterres, who was wise enough to appoint my good friend, his good friend, Miguel Moratinos as Undersecretary, High Representative, United Nations Line of Civilizations, with a specific designation to monitor anti-Semitism globally And even in the United Nations system, which unfortunately at given times appears as an anti-Israel move. Again, we welcome the entire diplomatic corps from the European Union who have joined us. And at that particular occasion, the last one, a few years ago, and I repeat again, it's my signature, and I hope that will be adopted in every country of the European Union. Don't use the word tolerance any longer. Tolerance means I'm superior, and you are a second-class citizen. No. Stress, mutual acceptance and respect the other. Mutual acceptance and respect the other. Keep that in mind. And that's how you teach the next generation. Next generation of children and children's children to live in peace. It's my great honor to welcome my partner, Jérémie Robert, the Consul General, who planned with our friend Arnold Penner this evening. Thank you. And we're going to have the benefit also. Will you rise for a second? So we'll have a French musical program. But I want to salute every member of the European Union today, diplomatic corps. Please rise so that we can say gratitude. Thank you for taking this battle on with us. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Jeremy?
Dear Rabbi Schneier, dear Miguel Angel Moratinos, dear Katharina von Schnurbein, dear Michael Driscoll, dear friends, I am honored to be here with you tonight in one of New York City's most unique and historic landmarks, the Park East Synagogue. The fight against anti-Semitism is a major priority for my country, France, and my president. It is also a main objective for the European Union. And this is why we wanted to organize this discussion during the French presidency of the Council of the European Union. I'm really grateful for all my EU colleagues who are here today. We are about 22 countries represented for the European Union. And I hope that this joint EU-US discussion will be an opportunity for us to learn from each other, and that it will empower us in this struggle against this terrible scourge that is anti-Semitism. As you said, it is inconceivable that we are still facing anti-Semitism today. We know that anti-Semitism is on the rise worldwide, and together we need to address this problem, to face it, and to take the measures that are needed. The European Union Council, Katharina will tell us, has reinforced its guidelines and its apparatus, and but there are still concern over hate speech, hate crimes, racism, and anti-Semitism in Europe. This is an issue that we are not hiding. We are facing it, and this is why all the EU member states are reinforcing their apparatus and the way they are fighting these terrible threats. At a national level, and I'm not going to be long because I speak on behalf of the European Union today, but as I told you, it has been a priority for my country. We are not hiding the fact that the anti-Semitic acts are there, they have been on the rise, and we need to address them. And France, I just want to say that France has some of the toughest criminal law in the world when it comes to anti-Semitism. In France, a criminal sentence can be doubled if the court has found that a person has racist intention or anti-Semitic intention. France voted to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. This definition now includes negationism as well as anti-Zionism as the denial of Israel's rights to exist, and this was an important step for us. France is also at the forefront of trying to regulate hate speech over the internet. We know this is a serious issue, and I'm sure we'll discuss that today. And also beyond the legalistic approach, there's also a lot of efforts which are being made through education for our kids to teach them history, and for our kids not to remember the history, and notably the history of the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism threatens the very foundation of our democracies. Since their ramifications are global, our efforts to combat anti-Semitism should be global as well. We look forward to continuing the discussion on how to strengthen our efforts on both sides of the Atlantic. This conference is a modest part of this effort, and I really want to thank Rabbi Schneier to have, as you say, been a partner in this initiative. I'm really, really grateful and honored for our partnership. Dear Rabbi Schneier, thank you very much. I wish you a very good discussion. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Our next speaker, Katharina von Schnurbein. Sie wird nicht in der deutschen Sprache reden. She will speak in English. But what's amazing about Katharina, and Miguel, last time we met with her was in Jerusalem. Going back to 2015, she already dealt with the issue of anti-Semitism. Mother of four, has devoted her energies to combat this cancer of ours. You know, during the Holocaust, there were departments for Jewish affairs dealing specifically with deportations, ghettos, murder. I remember today how times have changed for the better. We have now special envoys by Germany, by the European Mission, by France, by Austria, all across. That's the encouraging sign, in a way. So, Katharina, thank you for being one of the pioneers, veterans. And also, in the interest of time, the next speaker after Katharina will be the High Representative of the United Nations, my dear friend, Miguel Moratinos, former Foreign Minister of Spain, world statesman, just came back from Morocco, traveling all over the world in an alliance of civilizations, not in conflict of civilization. And our new addition to New York, the FBI in charge of New York, coming from Philadelphia, Michael Driscoll, has given so much a lawyer, doesn't practice law. I mean, you could really do a great job for your family practicing law. No, public service, dedicated to our nation, to our country, has served in various challenging roles, and now is looking after every New Yorker in New York's safety and security. So God bless you for it. You have our blessings and much, much joy and happiness with your children and wife who are still in Philadelphia. So you have to bring them back, and we'll celebrate them with you together. So this is the order of speeches, followed by the panel. Very able Martine Trink-Rubenstein, who will lead the panel discussion. Please give your attention and warm, warm welcome to Katharina von Schnurbein.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Schneier, Consul General, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a huge honor and emotion also to be able to speak from a pulpit like this, I think, in such a beautiful synagogue. It's not my first time, but always I find it very, very emotional. It's, of course, an honor and a joy to be here with you tonight. The environment is in stark contrast to the issue we're going to discuss, the virus of anti-Semitism in all its mutations and no vaccine found. And I think the question here tonight that I would like to put, and for me it's a bit the elephant in the room, is that despite all the action that has taken place on many levels, the Consul General mentioned already during the French presidency, by unanimity, member states once more adopted Council conclusion, this time on racism and anti-Semitism, bringing the two issues together, while before we had two resolutions on anti-Semitism on its own, which was also very important to recognize the specificity of anti-Semitism. We see action on European level. I will present you the EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism that we adopted last October. We see action on national level. In fact, in these conclusions in March, member states, again by unanimity, declared that by the end of this year, they will have national strategies on combating anti-Semitism. I think I would be too optimistic to say that all will have them, but what we are expecting that probably at least half of them will have dedicated strategies, and the others hopefully will have picked up the pen to draft at least a timeline on when they're going to adopt it in 2023. So we see a lot of progress also with regards to legislation, with regards to addressing anti-Semitism on the internet, for example, and yet anti-Semitism is on the rise. We see rocket high numbers of anti-Semitism and incidents on both sides of the Atlantic. In fact, here in the US, there are on average 8 incidents per day that ADL recorded for last year. And in the EU, if the measuring is done correctly in those countries where we have good measurement, it is roughly about the same. And I think this is the real challenge. We have had these numbers before the pandemic even, but during the pandemic, it increased significantly on the internet. The old conspiracy myths of Jews creating a pandemic and now making money with a potential vaccine, or not sharing the vaccine in order to rule the world, all these things within weeks of the start of the pandemic exploded on the net. And we made a measurement, and there was about a 13-fold increase of anti-Semitic content in the first year of the pandemic. The thing is, it doesn't go away. It just stays, and it adds on new forms or new mutations of old forms. And so now we are in war. Europe has changed since the 24th of February. We have war again on the European continent. I think that Europe is shifting. We used to have since the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989, something like a buffer zone between the European Union, to which many of the former satellite states of the Soviet Union joined in 2004, and Russia, and now the buffer zone, Ukraine, is under siege. And I think this brings us to a situation where two tectonic plates are meeting with all the consequences this has. I think for us, it's very clear that Europe will not be the same once this war is over. And when on the day it happened, I said to my husband, well, you know, we would not have thought that our children will grow up in times of war. It was unimaginable. But this war is based on a propaganda that speaks about the denazification of Ukraine. It's inherently anti-Semitic. It compares Ukraine, a democratic state, a state that has, it's not perfect, but has undergone in the last 30 years a lot of democratic reform, has started to detach itself from the Soviet way of looking at the Holocaust, to commemorating it, to recognizing it, to some extent recognizing not only one's own victimhood, but also the collaboration, has re-established, or has established, I should say rather, but with Babin Yar, a Holocaust memorial of a place where the largest so-called Holocaust by bullets happened. And it is not by coincidence that with this rhetorics, and by the way, they were prepared, we could measure already in the months leading up to the 24th of February, 200-fold increase of the word Nazi coming out of Kremlin sources, and a 400-fold increase of the word genocide. And for those who are following this a bit, you know that this has been at the heart of the rhetorics and of the propaganda. And so now with an economic downslope on the horizon, we know already who traditionally was blamed when the economy was going down. And I just want to show, that the issues when it comes to the source of anti-Semitism is much wider than, the relationship with the Jewish community. In fact, I believe we are at a situation where it simply multiplies independently of a presence of Jewish community, of knowing Jews. In fact, we know this also in other areas. The fewer the people, often the higher the prejudice. So this is the backdrop to which the European Commission presented in October last year its first ever strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. These two areas for us are very important to go together. In fact, I would say that the aspect of fostering Jewish life, of ensuring that Jews see a future for themselves in Europe, that they feel they have a perspective, not only for themselves, but for their children and their grandchildren, that they can go about their lives in line with their religious and cultural traditions as they choose, that they can be free from security concerns. This is at the heart of this strategy. So everything we do And there are about 70 actions, individual actions, that we as European Union can implement, or we will implement them together with member states, with civil society, of course with the Jewish community, always in close contact. And these initiatives, they can help, but we know we cannot do it alone. In fact, it will only make a difference if member states of the EU, if the regions, if the cities embrace this as theirs, and if they start to act. Because we can do whatever we want in the end, unless it happens locally and change happens locally, nothing changes for the Jewish communities. So one important aspect is with regards to action on the internet. The internet is the #1 entry point for anti-Semitism into our living rooms. During the pandemic, we spent much more time in front of the screen than we ever wished and we thought, and this has had its effect on many people in a negative way, being exposed to hatred, to conspiracy, and it has taken to the street. We saw people with Stars of David saying unvaccinated on it. These were not extremists. These were people from the middle of society. And I think we've made a mistake for many years to think that anti-Semitism is mainly in the right-wing extremism, left-wing or jihadist extremism corners of society. But really what we see is that it is in the center of society. And that, you know situations in which at work or at your sports club or, I don't know, the parents' association, someone makes a casual remark. And it can be, why don't you pay? I think, don't you have the money? This kind of assumption. Or asking for a Jewish doctor rather than just a good doctor. Why would one want a Jewish doctor? So these kind of prejudices that people have in their mind. Also the question of Holocaust distortion, comparing the situation of Israel and Gaza to the situation of Nazi Germany, of a genocide of 6 million people. All of this we have seen exploding on the net. And so what we want to do is a threefold approach. One is to ensure that we have good legislation in place. The EU found agreement to create for the highway, the data highway, some rules. It's called the Digital Services Act, and it will oblige platforms to disclose their algorithms to authorities, to be monitored and regularly report to authorities, to pay for this monitoring, to ensure better redress mechanisms for people when there's complaint, and to disclose also why and if not, they have not taken something down, for example. There will be fines to up to 5% of their global income if they do not comply. So this is a legislation that has teeth and that will, in addition to hate speech legislation that is already in place in Europe, hopefully be a game changer and make the internet again the place where we all want to be, because in a way I think we've become used to the fact that when we are on social media, left and right, there's always some hatred flying around. We would not accept that in the real world either, and somehow we got used to the fact that on the internet it's normal. We have for many years now, but reinforced this aspect also in the strategy about security. We are of the opinion that security is a responsibility of each state. It's the #1 responsibility of a state. And if a group needs, due to after risk analysis, certain degrees of security, then it is for the state to provide it and to ensure it, and not for the communities to pay it from their community budget, which is, like for any other civil society group, meant to support civil society actions and old people's homes or schools or whatever, but the security should be ensured by the state. And based on that is the whole aspect on fostering Jewish life and the security for Jews, and to establish an environment in which Jewish life is possible. And you might say, you know, why should that not be possible? In fact, there are countries that are debating the issue of prohibiting Shrita. There are discussions about whether Brit Milah is actually in line with child-friendly behavior. And, you know, it's this kind of debates that put Jews in a corner of being backwards and have a very detrimental effect. And we have seen Jews leaving Europe. And we know that whenever Jews left Europe, it was bad for Europe. I think this is something that we need to realize. This is, of course, above all, with regards to the Jews. And it would be enough if it was only for the Jews, but in fact, it's a much wider issue. This is about safeguarding democracy, safeguarding our values, and having a society in which we all want to live. And then the final aspect in this strategy is about Holocaust remembrance. We know we have little time left to ensure that young people can hear firsthand from Holocaust survivors their stories. And we have a project which is called Young Ambassadors on the Holocaust, where we want to match these young people with the survivors to ensure that they can become, that it will become their story, and they can tell it on social media, but also you know, in their immediate environment, and become ambassadors to ensure that the memory of the Shoah will remain with us. We have another big action initiative planned, which is related to the Holocaust. It's called Where the Holocaust Happened. It is to show how local the Holocaust happened, to show places where Jews were deported, Jews were rounded up, also hidden, which in many countries, in particular in Central and Eastern Europe, are not even marked. And on the other hand, there are many small initiatives that struggle because either they do not have funding or they don't know how to do things. And so we want to provide this platform to make sure that we can connect them and to show, to ensure that the memory is not lost locally, and to show how people had a choice also back then, and how we have a choice today when it is about anti-Semitism. This strategy is really the commitment of the European Union to ensure that Jewish life can continue to flourish in Europe, that Jews will feel safe when walking European streets, wearing a yarmulke, a Magen David, or a religious outfit. We are immensely glad that 3 generations after the Holocaust, Jewish life is thriving in Europe, despite all the challenges. And we should never allow it to be threatened. I hope that this strategy will be a game changer And we have put in it a very challenging sentence, which is that we want to put an end to anti-Semitism. Now, we are, of course, not naive. This is a 2,000-year-old hatred that will not go away overnight. But I believe we have to have this goal in order to really have the end goal in front of us to achieve the small steps. And I would like to end with a quote from Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission, which is the executive body of the European Union, where the proposals for policies and for laws are being made, and this strategy was also adopted by the European Commission. She was in Israel yesterday, and she reaffirmed again the close connection between Israel and the European Union for our history, for our shared values, and also for our good cooperation. And she said, "Our democracy flourishes if Jewish life in Europe flourishes too. Throughout the centuries, the Jewish people have been a light unto the nations, and they shall be a light unto Europe for many centuries ahead." She then said, "Long live Europe, Am Israel Chai." Thank you very much.
Thank you, my dear Rabbi Schneier, for your kind invitation to attend this very important event. Can you imagine my emotion to be so moved by being again in this impressive synagogue? I have the honor and the privilege to be invited from the day one when I was appointed High Representative for the United Nations Alliance of Civilization. And I had been coming every year with Secretary General to attend this Remembrance Day of UN on the 27th of January. But let me, my dear Rabbi, to take the opportunity to salute our panelist colleagues that are accompanying us today in this important event. Let's start by the General Consul of France for having the initiative, together with Rabbi Schneier, to celebrate and to take the opportunity of the presence of my dear friend Katharina von Schnurbein to have this event in order to really a conference on rising anti-Semitism and how we should work together. And I have the opportunity, Monsieur le Consul, for expressing my congratulations and my greetings for the excellent presidency of the European Union during this very challenging month of 2022. So you can transmit to your political representative our commitment and our satisfaction for the extraordinary work that you have played here in New York and all over the world, defending the rights and principles of the European Union. You have not to forget I'm a European myself. So I have to féliciter le Consul et la présidence française pour son travail. Let me, of course, salute Katharina von Schnurbein. We are meeting every day here in New York. We are meeting in Jerusalem. We are working together. It's a pleasure to have you here in our place, in our city, in New York. And being in New York, well, to have Michael Driscoll, the director in charge of FBI, who take care of our security. So we have to express our thanks. We feel secure. And for me, as the man in charge of safeguarding religious sites, I think the work that the United States in general, but in particular the work the FBI has been doing to protect the synagogue and only religious sites is extraordinary. So thank you very much to be with us. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at the onset, anti-Semitism found a fertile ground in Europe more than 77 years ago, when 6 million Jewish women, men, children perished in the Holocaust. The medieval town of Dachau in Bavaria is the first concentration camp. Anti-Semitism, the oldest and most persistent form of prejudice and hate, is not a thing of the past. Unfortunately, it is rising yet again, morphing into different shape and form and using new innovative medium. The distortion of history and the horror of the Shoah is the most troubling of this form. Across the world, social turmoil during the pandemic exacerbated prejudice, hate speech, and discrimination against minorities on account of religion, belief, race, ethnicity, but my dear friends, especially targeting Jews, and this pattern still continues. The event of tonight, or this evening here, is focused on how Europe is addressing anti-Semitism. And I think, and I believe that one way of addressing anti-Semitism is to look at it as a global problem. Because anti-Semitism is not only a European problem, or not a problem of the Jewish community alone. When anti-Semitism exists in a society, there will be most likely other forms of discrimination and racist ideology. Therefore, anti-Semitism and all manifestations of discrimination are a clear affront to democratic values, human rights law, and the core values of the UN Charter upholds. When left unaddressed, anti-Semitism poses a threat to the social cohesion and the stability of our communities. Moreover, anti-Semitism doesn't occur only in countries where Jewish communities live, but it's also present in countries where there are no Jews at all. The rise in conspiracy theories and hate speech online and offline and in mainstream media against the Jews during the pandemic were reiterated by hate mongers who live in countries where there were not only few Jews, or worse, there were no Jews at all. Therefore, my dear friend, to combat anti-Semitism, we need to adopt a global holistic approach rooted in human rights that bring together governments, civil societies, faith community, religious leaders, media, education institutions, and municipality. The United Nations Alliance of Civilization stands ready to work with all stakeholders to uproot this scourge. My dear colleagues and friends, the United Nations was created in the ashes of the Second World War and the horror of the Holocaust. As such, the United Nations will continue to be on the front line to fight against anti-Semitism and all forms of religious bigotry and racism. The United Nations Secretary General, coming here every year, has always underlined that rising racism, anti-Semitism, virulent anti-Muslim bigotry, and anti-refugee hatred are all so dangerous. That is why we have made tackling the root causes of intolerance and hate as an urgent priority for the United Nations. I want to recall the adoption of UN General Assembly resolution on the Holocaust denial this January 2022 that demonstrates the collective will of the international community to take another step in the right direction in the global fight against anti-Semitism, since the denial of the Holocaust in its various forms is a real expression of anti-Semitism. Over the past 2 years since my designation by the UN Secretary General as the UN focal point to monitor anti-Semitism and enhance a system-wide response, I have noticed that numerous Jewish organizations have been doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the fight against anti-Semitism. But I also noticed that there are a lot of synergies in the work that we all do. It is that which we have been working sometimes in silos. Now that I am dedicating more time and effort to this portfolio, I hope that my office, with your help, we will finalize an action plan, a strategic plan similar to the European Union strategic plan to fighting anti-Semitism, a document that will provide guidance towards a more coordinated and enhanced response to anti-Semitism anchored in human rights. Concluding, I wish to commend Katharina von Schnurbein for the valuable work she did with the US strategy in combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life, and look forward to collaborate with you in implementation of several recommendations. And of course, I also wish to applaud my dear friend Rabbi Schneier, an appeal of conscience led by his leadership for his most recent initiative, Respect the Other. Yes, tolerance we have to delete in our word, in our terminology, in our addressing, and we have to adapt what Rabbi Schneier said in his introductory work. Respect the other, mutually acceptance of the other. And I recall what you say, my dear friend Rabbi Schneier, on the Holocaust Remembrance Service early this year. And I quote you, "Children are born to love, and they are taught how to hate. They must be guided not just to tolerate others, but to respect and accept your neighbor." In this context, your brilliant initiative, Respect the Other, which has Appeal of Conscience Foundation has launched in New York, few schools, is the right target to follow up. United Nations Alliance of Civilization stand ready to join hands with you to expand the project to other schools, and I will be, of course, totally engaged in committing in order to work with all of you in order to succeed in this fight against anti-Semitism. Thank you very much.
Good evening. As the Rabbi noted, my name is Mike Driscoll. I am the Assistant Director in charge of the FBI's office here in New York, and I want to thank the Rabbi for the invitation to come tonight. As he noted, my last post had been in Philadelphia, but I am a native New Yorker. Spent most of my career here, grew up in and around New York City, actually lived just a block or two away from here for many years, but this is unfortunately the first time I've ever been inside the synagogue, and I have to tell you, it is truly a beautiful place. You are lucky to have it. We are lucky to have it here in New York. As the Rabbi noted, the synagogue is a location where you see the good points of life and you see the sad points of life, and that is not different than what's going on here tonight. We're here tonight to talk about collaboration and partnership amongst the EU and the United States, with the Jewish community of New York and the Jewish community around the world. But we're also here to talk about the dark side of it, and that is the fact that anti-Semitism and the hate crimes we address in the FBI have not gone away. We spend a lot of time in the FBI tracking and understanding the statistics and the intelligence behind these kind of crimes. We'll be coming out with another report here in the coming weeks that talk about the stats. But the last report that was put out last year didn't paint a very rosy picture when it comes to hate crime. And we saw a significant uptick nationwide. And we've also seen that certain groups continue to pop up in those numbers. We see that 53% of the crimes, hate crimes that are focused on race or ethnic backgrounds, are focused on Black and African Americans. But we also see that while there's maybe a slight downtick in hate crime that's motivated because of religious identity, those that do occur, over 60% of them are targeting those of the Jewish faith. And likewise, we're seeing a violent crime increase across our nation in many large cities. And while those numbers may seem insignificant when you look at them on a page, the last report indicated a small uptick of about 5%. That 5% means 65,000 more victims nationwide, and among those are, of course, hate crime victims. So to target that, to address that, we need better intelligence. We need to understand that threat better, and that means working with communities like this. getting information from these communities to see what they see and hear, what they're experiencing. But it also means better information amongst law enforcement, what we're sharing. And that always isn't easy because of the definitions and the way they're categorized and what is labeled as a hate crime. Last year, the FBI adapted a new system, the National Incident-Based Reporting Structure, or NIBRS, that is focused on improving that data and improving that collection. But still, there's a long way to go. We're only at about a little over 60% of law enforcement in the United States is currently providing information to that system. But already we're seeing improvements in what we understand. And what we know for the FBI and all of those agencies that are providing that intelligence is that investigating hate crime is a very challenging piece in the United States. As I mentioned, getting that information, understanding the reporting is difficult. And how that hate crimes are defined in the United States can have subtle differences from department to department, agency to agency. And of course, here in the United States, we are lucky to enjoy a very coveted, very respected, very much enjoyed and protected freedom of speech. But what comes with the freedom of speech is that challenge of investigating and prosecuting hate crime. And as you heard mentioned earlier, the increase in hate crime across social media and hate language has only increased in recent times. And where an individual might have acted on their own in the past, they now have a sounding board in which to grow that hatred. And it causes the spread of that challenge. And of course, investigating hate crimes, we're generally talking about lone actors. Not always, but in most cases, we're talking about individuals who took it upon themselves to do something violent, to cross that line from free speech into the world of a crime, to cross that world into that world of violence. But tracking a lone actor is a lot more difficult than looking at a criminal organization. And it relies very much on that open dialogue with all communities so that we're sharing intelligence and hearing and seeing what the average citizen hears and sees and what they're concerned about. And of course, the target of those crimes are not hardened military institutions or financial institutions with significant resources spent on security. They are, of course, soft targets like the very synagogue we stand in here today, or houses of worship anywhere around the country. The key to addressing all of these problems is, of course, outreach and education. No matter what tools we develop in law enforcement, that outreach and education continues to be the best way to address it. It is incumbent upon us in law enforcement to build upon that trust before an incident. As you saw in the attack in Colleyville, Texas, just a few weeks ago, what helped secure a safe end to that event and no deaths from that attack were a relationship established beforehand. It helped that rabbi who ran that institution knew his law enforcement partners on a first-name basis, and that the community knew who they were, they knew who to contact, and they had talked about what do we do in the event of this kind of an emergency. We're lucky here in New York to have a tremendous partnership with the NYPD. They have a very, very significant and very aggressive hate crime investigation team that takes all of these threats very seriously, and we partner with them on a regular basis. And we know that this synagogue and many of the synagogues here across the city enjoy a robust relationship with them and with my office here in the FBI. The message for all of these tasks and all of these efforts is the same, is that we will not target that intolerance of any race or creed, and that all beliefs and orientations should deserve to live without fear. And most importantly, what I'd like to convey to you is that the FBI stands ready to work not only with our European partners, but with the Jewish community here in New York, Jewish community around the country, and any community that is dealing with this type of hate and struggle. So I thank you for the invitation today, and I look forward to the panel discussion with our partners.
Is this working? It is. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for wonderful contributions and say that we actually have an extraordinary panel here. Anti-Semitism has 100 heads, and I should speak louder. I was just saying that this panel here is quite extraordinary because it shows the breadth of what it takes to fight anti-Semitism. We have representatives of the United Nations, of the European Commission, member of the FBI, member of course, our host, the Synagogue, member of the French Diplomatic Corps, and everybody is necessary to address this terrible plague. It's also true that it requires a cooperation between international institutions, national governments, and on the ground, informants, the communities, and trust. So there's several directions that have been outlined, particularly by the coordinator of the European Commission, for new strategies with respect to fighting anti-Semitism. And I think I'd like to start with the internet, which everybody has recognized is a mega amplifier of everything that's bad in terms of spreading anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, conspiracies of various sorts. And I was very interested by your mention of the Digital Service Act and the fact that it looks like it's going to be monitored by the European Commission. And I'd like you to maybe elaborate on what you expect, how you expect this to work, how you can fight back the onslaught of anti-Semitic comments through this.
Well, this legislation basically will try to put an end to the black box that we have so far had with regards to the internet, that basically we don't know as users what happens with our data, how it is amplified, how it is, how you get into a bubble, how you stay there. And I think one thing that is really necessary is transparency in order to make sure that, and there of course the situation in Europe is different from the US, that whenever there is hate speech, it can be much more effectively taken down, that we also, we don't say it in the legislation, but it is behind it, that the platforms are not only postmen, they know what's in the letter. They know the content. Their business model is built on amplifying hatred in the end, because it sells. So, and this is the challenge for them to actually disclose their algorithms, because this is a bit their secret. But what we say is, in order to operate in Europe, and it's a geographical limitation, you have to abide by these rules, because we no longer tolerate that. We've always said, in fact, that hate speech is not free speech. I know it's a big difference from the US, but before our history, and with the history also of the Shoah, this is where we have come to and what we have agreed in Europe. And therefore, we need these rules, and we need the authorities. This will be built up, the structures will be built up in the European Commission, and we know that the platforms need to contribute also financially their share in this monitoring. They could do it themselves, if they wanted to. They could have done it a long time ago. In fact, we created a code of conduct in 2016 with them to take down voluntarily hate speech that is flagged to them. But if they don't do it, and we've also said that for at least 5 years now, then we legislate. And so the fact that this legislation is now agreed is a huge step forward.
And what has the reaction been of the media companies, the social media companies? Have they reacted by action or just continued?
Well, I mean, now I think they wait for the adoption. This is not something that came out of the blue. I mean, they have done a lot of lobbying. They have tried to also water it down, but there was very broad consensus. Of course, the devil is in the detail. You need to, when it's then about legislation, it took time to agree this because we need to agree it between the European Commission, the Parliament, and the Council, which is the representation of all 27 member states. So, it took time, but I believe that this piece of legislation is really a game changer.
In America, there's been a little bit of self-policing by social media companies. Has that happened in Europe?
Yes, in fact, we have, and this is one of the areas that we are also building up as part of the strategy. We have already a network supported of NGOs that are trained to be trusted flaggers, so to flag hate speech, that have the knowledge to discern what is illegal hate speech and what is harmful speech, but maybe below the illegality threshold. And this is what we're now building up for specifically the content of anti-Semitic incidents or anti-Semitic speech, for them to know in all EU languages and also in languages that are non-EU languages but transport anti-Semitic content into the EU, to discern whether something is anti-Semitic or a political statement or whether it is hate speech, and then to be able to act, which means, for example, when it is lawful but awful, as we say. Yeah? For example, some forms of Holocaust distortion are not necessarily illegal, but we need facts, counter-speech, links to websites. The platforms have shown in the pandemic that they can do this, that when you search something, they actually redirect you to an authoritative website rather than the idea that you have to take an infusion of some chlorophyll. Yeah.
Thank you. And is there any, how are you using the internet, if you are, in your work?
So the internet has really changed law enforcement in all aspects. The day of the traditional investigation of a bank robbery scene where the yellow tape goes up around and police cordon off the area and the investigation is conducted. That's not how it works anymore. It impacts everything we're doing, and it very much means that the information and data we need to conduct an investigation exists, not in our ability to just touch it, but it's what you see on the internet. It's what you have access to in your systems and what the private sector has access to in their systems. So it impacts everything we have, and in hate crime in particular, we see a lot of activity online where, as I noted before, folks have a sounding board now to spread that hate speech. And it's not illegal in the United States to hate. It's not illegal to say things that you or I might consider vile and offensive. It's only when they cross the line into that area of violence and begin to threaten violence that we can take action on it. So it's a very, very difficult thing to police. We do have good partnerships with the social media companies. They will, in my experience, be very aggressive about taking that type of speech offline whenever it's identified by the public or if we bring it to their attention. They are very quick to do that. But in many instances, it's seen first by members of the public, or it's something you see, you hear about yourself and you're able to report it to law enforcement to take action. And I will say that these large media companies are just really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the internet and what's available out there. There's a whole dark web of information where hate speech is spread and even more vile planning and violence is discussed, that there is no large media company there to police it or self-correct it.
I'd like to go to another issue that you raised, which is security. And of course, the responsibility for funding security rests with national governments. But on the one hand, you have the attacks, assaults, harassment on the streets, which need to be policed. And on the other hand, you have prevention. And I was wondering, in the old days, intelligence sharing was not exactly up to snuff amongst the European Union. I was wondering whether progress had been made. And you mentioned Europol in your plan. How is that going?
Well, I think that there has been progress on cooperation overall between law enforcement authorities in sharing information, but also in learning from each other and in sharing practices. And of course, as you can imagine, in Europe it's not so easy because we have within the European Union, within the 27 countries, 23 languages. So a lot of this, and it starts with the spelling of foreign names that have to be transliterated, and everyone transliterates them differently. And then when you search for a name, not necessarily the right person comes up. So there are very concrete obstacles, which I believe there has been, the cooperation has been significantly increased. As part of the strategy, we foresee further, not only the increase of cooperation, but also training concretely on recognizing anti-Semitism, because that's the only way to actually fight it, when you know what it is about. But I believe there is still and remains an issue of trust. When you share information, you really need to trust each other. And within the EU, this is what we're aiming at, to have that trust where you then can share the information without being afraid that it's going to be leaked or misused.
You mentioned that information sharing is improving on your side as well.
It definitely is, and I think that there's also a concerted effort amongst law enforcement, not only in the United States, but internationally, to make sure we're sharing information on these topics. There are certain areas that I think all countries agree on, that getting this information out immediately, and these areas where child exploitation, of course, is an area where countries cooperate very quickly on. But I would say that hate crime is another area where we see, particularly when it crosses into that line of folks are planning or talking about violence against civilians, right? We're not talking about planning attacks on military installations. We're talking about civilians being targeted. In my experience, all countries have been very good about sharing that intelligence quickly with us here in the U.S.
Undersecretary General, you mentioned that it's a global problem and that every country should address it in the spirit of interfaith dialogue and goodwill for the better of humanity. Could you elaborate a little bit on your action in that respect within the UN, which I salute, because it's not always been the case that the UN has been so welcoming to the issue?
Well, thank you. UN is not very popular, no? In general. Among ourselves, yes, but let's be frank, between the Jewish community and Israel, and Jewish representative, UN is not very much welcome in general. And there is a paradox, because the UN and Israel and the Jewish community, they had been, the two elements to create a better world. I mean, the sense that both sides, the state of Israel was, recognized immediately when Prime Minister Ben-Gurion sent the letter in 1948, and at the same time the UN was, as I said in my speech, after the horror of Holocaust, this human tragedy and drama, well, the decision maker decided to create an international organization to say never again. And unfortunately, the development and the relationship between, let's say in global terms, Jewish community and Israel and UN has not been always very easy. Even if the Secretary General, the leadership of UN, I think, I have no the records, but in general would say And what I can tell you is the new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, absolutely. Rabbi Schneier is a witness. He's the front line. His action is to fight anti-Semitism.
The very fact that you were appointed.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not only that, it's because he really wants to move forward. And every year when he comes to this fantastic, impressive historical synagogue, he repeats his commitment. And his commitment are not only words, they are action. So when I fully understand the concern of the Jewish community about the UN, and we have to acknowledge that, of course, there has been a tremendous, let's say, actions or policies that not always reflect what the Jewish community in Israel was expecting coming from the UN. But let's be clear with all of you. I mean, UN is what the member states decide to be. It's not a strange entity. The decisions of UN are made by UN members. So what is my approach in my new responsibility? Is to change the action and perception and behavior of member states. And then come what you say about this, we are in a global society. I mean, now today, there are some people who say, let's go globalize ourselves. This is not going to happen. Even with the war, even with this confrontation, you cannot deglobalize the world. You can make globalization better. But to think that we are going to go to a unilateral or nationalistic aspect, from my point of view, that is a dream. It's not going to happen because we are interconnected. Impossible. The virus are not asking permission to enter in our body. And the technology is not going to ask permission to divide between frontiers and barriers. So what we have is to create a global governance that we will respect each other, that we will understand, and then of course we have to follow, abide to the rules and principles of human rights, Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and etc. All these elements that have created in this evolution of humanity a progress to a better future. So that in mind, as I said in my speech, of course, anti-Semitism is a Jewish problem, mainly. You are the one to suffer. You are the one who has been suffering one after one day after one day. It's a European West problem, yes, because unfortunately, when the attacks and the violation take more place, but we will be wrong if we don't address the global component of the new anti-Semitism. We've witnessed that during the pandemic. The theory of conspiración, teoría de conspiración, my translation, conspiratory theories, I don't know, from Africa, Latin America, Asia, fingered out the Jewish, even with COVID. Can you imagine? And there was no Jews in their countries, or practically no. But they have these attitudes against the Jewish, practicing anti-Semitism. So my task within the UN is to work inside the institution, inside the system, intramuros, in order to avoid any anti-Semitic attitude or behavior or declaration, statement, or behavior. At the same time, to try to enlarge the understanding and awareness of anti-Semitism all around the world. Because, yesterday we were discussing about this negative experience of Durban conference. Durban conference. What happened? Because the African countries are anti-Semitic? No, because they didn't were aware about anti-Semitism. When we talk about definition of anti-Semitism definition, IHRA definition, or whatever, they never have heard about IHRA. So how you are going to convince them if they don't know what we are talking about? And then, with all my respect to my European compatriots and friends, because I'm here in UN, and of course I fully support the European Union, I'm European, I praise French presidency, I will follow with them, but the West and Europe, we are making certain mistake in not understanding that the world have changed, and that there are other people, other nations, other continents. And we think that we know everything, and we don't know everything. And we think that our model is the best model over the world, and yes, it's one of the best models. But it's not the only model. So if we want to bring them to us, we have to be a little less patronizing, listening, as Rabbi Schneier, respecting, as Rabbi Schneier say, accepting, as Rabbi Schneier say. And then you defend your conviction, your principle, your values, without neglecting or abandoning them, but with a different attitude. And then the people will come to you. So we are in a very, very difficult juncture now. And in our fight against anti-Semitism, we have to start within the UN to enlarge the scope of our action and to try to explain and let know, educate people in order that never again. So that is our mission, that is the mission of the UN, and we hope with all elements together, all participants, we can achieve that goal.
Thank you.
I just add to this. You know, United Nations is really composed of many, many organizations within the UN. You have no problem in the World Health Organization. We do have a problem in the Human Rights Council. And I'm happy to say that 22 countries, just the other day, took a stand condemning the Human Rights Council for selecting Israel all the time and neglecting other human rights violations. I can also, when I served in the United Nations as Deputy Ambassador of the United States, Israel was challenged in terms of getting actually admitted to the UN. It was the Soviet, Eastern Europe, and Arab blocs who blocked that. Okay? Also, what you should know, on the positive side, Holocaust education by the UN. Holocaust education by the UN. Sending UN personnel to Africa, to Asia, teaching about the Holocaust. And the reason I mention this, because it's not all black. It's a matter of cultivating and expanding. I can tell you right here in this synagogue, Yom Kippur was not a holiday in the United Nations. Did you know that? And Herman Hochberg, you were here when I had the religious leaders saying, if there is a holiday, a Christian holiday, recognized by the UN, because I had a problem. Whenever the President of the United States comes to the UN on Tuesday for the opening, the entire delegation has to be there. And Secretary Schultz was my boss, President Reagan, and the session started on Yom Kippur. And I had a conflict. What do I do? So I wrote to the President, it's Yom Kippur. He said, your place is in the synagogue. Okay? Today, that's no longer a problem. Yom Kippur is recognized as a holiday, just like the Muslim and the Christians. So what I'm saying now, the very fact that for the first time you have in the United Nations, my friend, former Spanish ambassador to Israel, who has an understanding, actually as a monitor of anti-Semitism in partnership with the European Commission, in partnership with many allies. We have to cultivate that and expand it. And I think I want to thank each one of you for being awake as to the plague. And you know, I want to say something. We're very hard on the tech companies. God created the world, good and evil. Okay? The very fact that we have these tech companies, and I'm not a lobbyist, by the way, they're many good. They have connected us, but also many bad things. When atomic energy was discovered, we thought, can eliminate coal, everything else. Then you had what? Hiroshima. You had Chernobyl. So again, I want to thank all of you. And we end up on a good musical note from France. For being in this battle that requires coalition. Coalition. Very interesting news from my birthplace, Vienna. 2 days ago, for the first time, there was a gathering. I see my friend, the Consul General, is smiling, because I follow what's happening there. Religious leaders, union leaders, government leaders, all cross sections of society, gathering, trying to understand how we can work together on an annual basis to cope with this hatred. And I hope that all the other countries will follow this kind of a concerted, united effort. And I want to thank, really, Katharina, your dedication since 2015 will be rewarded by the one above. Okay?
Jérémie, would like to say a word? Jérémie, would you like to say a word?
It's difficult to speak after the rabbi, but I just want to say two things. First, on regulation, when we talked, it's a big tech company, and I don't think they are lying. They just say they are seeking for more regulation when it comes to guiding them how to regulate, because right now they are just left alone to regulate themselves. You know, they are putting their own structure of regulation, their own bodies of like internal court, like Facebook has created like a Supreme Court inside Facebook. And in our discussion, they are very keen to have more regulation on the content. Then on the taxes, it's a different issue. But on the content, I think they are seeking for ways to be helped. What Mr. Moratinos said on the fact that there is anti-Semitism where there are no Jews, and also the fact that we are increasingly isolated. When I say we, it's the Western world. In the rest of the world, this is something that I am not only convinced, but I am witnessing. I have been witnessing it. You're talking about Africa, that I know very well, the Arab countries, and there's really an issue. And the crisis in Ukraine right now, the war in Ukraine, is increasing this isolation. The Western world is increasingly isolated, and we run the risk, if we don't see it, if we don't react, we run the risk to be around 1 billion Westerners in the world versus 7 billion, and in 2050, 10 billion people. And being isolated. And the anti-Semitism should also, the fight against anti-Semitism should be seen in that respect. This is not only a Western issue, it's a world issue. We should address it while not giving any lessons to the rest of the world. I think the link with racism, the fight against racism is good, because racism is also an issue which has been faced by many other people. So. But this is, I was really happy that Mr. Moratinos mentioned this, because this is something I personally fear very much.
Thank you.
We have the musical component, but I just want to say that in addition to some of the positive developments, you know, when you're a survivor, you have to be an optimist. And I'm the perennial optimist. Tomorrow, under the auspices of the Alliance of Civilization, in the United Nations, Katharina, you will be the keynote speaker under the auspices of the High Representative. As an ambassador of the United Nations Alliance, as one of the founders, I saw the list of participants, and this is dealing with anti-Semitism. Saudi Arabia, present. Egypt, present. Morocco, present. UAE, present. Okay? When I served in the United Nations, it never happened. So we believe in, try to remember, Tikkun Olam, perfecting the imperfect world. And that's not only us up here, each one of you have to be helping. That's the purpose of your life on earth. Leave it better than the way you found it. That should be your legacy. That should be your commitment. And really, we should give a great, great, great appreciation to these leaders. And I also want to note, so God is supporting our united front. And by the way, I don't want to call it United Front, otherwise I'll be accused of United Front of China. Okay? No. Our united we will prevail. But I'm so happy. The Czech Consul General and the Ambassador, will you rise for a moment? Now, you'll find the presidency of the European Commission will be in very, very good hands. France is concluding the session. We should have had the Czech flag here that you would hand over, okay? All right? All right? So I invite both of you to come here with exchange the flags, okay? But the Czech Republic, they have experienced communist persecution, oppression, okay? But you cannot kill the spirit of Masaryk. You know what Masaryk? The first leader of Czechoslovakia, Democrat. And finally, as an American refugee who saw the Statue of Liberty when I came in on the Marine Marlin, which was really transporting American troops to fight for freedom in Europe. Statue of Liberty. We thank God for the United States of America. Okay? Again, we may be divided states at this point, but eventually, it's still, people are yearning to come here to enjoy the freedom, the opportunity. So together, let's end on a very happy musical note. And thank you so much for joining us.
Fantastic. Very good.
No, I'm a great fan of you.
Yes, of course.
Can't just look at the black side.
you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.